You are watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. My name's Stephen Galpin and this is the programme where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. Joining me today is Joanna Leggett, co-founder of Leggett Immobilier, French property experts. Welcome, Joanna.
Hi Stephen, thank you.
Nice to see you again. John Howard, property developer, author, TV commentator and public speaker and lots of other things too.
Yep.
Most experienced property man I know.
Well, that's not quite true, is it, Stephen? Because you are a little bit older than me.
Well, that's true enough. Now you bring it up. Okay. Well, look, there we are. Looking forward to hearing your knowledge. So, Joanna, I'm going to start with you. Having recently started a new job, which allows me to work from any location, I'm seriously considering moving to a rural area of another country in Europe. What would be the key benefits to France, say over Spain or Portugal? And importantly, is the infrastructure such as internet connection and public transport comparative to what I will be used to in the UK?
To start off with, if you're looking for rural, which suggests that you were looking for a rural property, by 2022, all of France will be on, or they're saying all of France will be on cable, on fibre optic cable. In most of the villages, it's already going in now, even where I live, which is in the back of Beyond. So as far as internet connection goes, yes. As far as infrastructure and public transport goes, if you're living in a rural location, you need a car because realistically there's like one bus a day that will go into the city and then come back out again. So as far as transport goes, if you're looking rural, and bearing in mind France is the biggest country in Western Europe, it's much bigger than Spain and Portugal. So there is going to be distances, even, the supermarket may be 10 kilometres away. However, the great thing is there's no traffic. So the roads are generally clear. You're not sitting in traffic jams unless you're in a city like Paris, which you will be, but there you would have infrastructure. But if you're looking against Portugal and Spain, one of the benefits, you can drive to France in a day if you need to go backwards and forwards from the UK. There's loads of airports similar to Spain. France is bigger, so you've got a lot more space and it's also cheaper. So for value for money, if you need a big property or you want lots of land, then you would get that in France, whereas you may not get that so much in Spain or Portugal.
That's interesting. So actually the transport shouldn't be too much of an issue. If you're working from home, then your need to sort of travel in and out on a daily basis is negated, isn't it? So if it is just to go to the supermarket or into a big city on a Saturday or a Sunday, it shouldn't be too bad. John, as a developer, I'm quite interested in this. I like this idea of putting fibre in everywhere. But what about satellite internet? I mean, especially in a country as big as France, you'd think that would be the preference, wouldn't you?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I would say that the fact that they've got cable going in is wonderful. I mean, that's fantastic. And this country, we're where I am, we're not exactly in the country, but we're outside of town, and they're still talking about another 3 years till we get it. And my internet is absolutely pretty dreadful. I mean, it's so important today, especially with people working from home and in France. What would happen if they work for a UK company but based in France? Would they pay UK tax or French tax? How does that?
It depends where their fiscal residence is. So if they're living in over 183 days in France, then they pay tax French in France.
Tax, French tax. That's interesting.
And would need a full residency.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. It's quite interesting, John, isn't it? This fibre. I know you've just recently done a new development. I mean, the trouble we've had around here, actually, the infrastructure for Canary Wharf, you'd think it'd be very high tech. It's not been, actually. And it's taken quite a while for the big companies to put in fibre. But even then, I see in some blocks, people are saying, oh, we've got fibre. No, they haven't, actually. They've got fibre to the box outside the development.
Yes.
And then the companies are using the copper wiring to take it to your flat. So you actually lose the benefit.
Yeah, you're losing the benefit.
Fibre.
And also with concrete, with big concrete tower blocks, it's very difficult, the Wi-Fi. because
Yeah,
of the
absolutely.
concrete.
Yeah.
So it's not easy. It's you think you're buying a brand new flat or something in beautiful high rise, and all the rest of it. But actually going through concrete, that you need boosters.
But we have the same problem with the walls. If you're
Yeah,
buying a
well, of course,
historic property,
in
the walls
France
are
especially.
great big stone walls.
Yeah, you've got the same problem.
Yeah.
So whether it's new or whether it's old, it makes no difference.
Yeah. Okay, but it's good to know that the government there is
It's very
you know,
Yeah,
impressive.
they're very
Yeah.
proactive.
Yeah, it's good news. Great
It's all
stuff.
that tax they pay.
Right, John. Now here's one I know that's going to please you. I'm wanting to start a business in the property industry.
Right.
What will it take to succeed? I read so many online tutorials, but I'm cautious about the reality of their success. Any advice would be appreciated.
Goodness me. Well, we could spend all day on it, couldn't we, Joe? What I would say is always invest your time and money into something you enjoy doing. So if you enjoy developing, taking cottages and restoring them, then do that. If you like converting houses into flats, do that. If you like HMOs, then do that. You need to be interested in what you do. You can make money out of all sorts of different things in property. I've got a friend of mine who does lock-up garages. Bore me to death, but he buys hundreds of lock-up garages and makes a very good living out of it. So it really depends what you're interested in. He's actually very boring because all he wants to talk about.
How does he make his money then? Just renting them out?
Yeah, so he rents them out. He buys them in bulk. He rents them all out. And then on occasions he'll get planning permission, at the back of a development or something like that. But he bangs on and on about it, and it's terribly boring when you go out for dinner with him. So it depends what you want to do. Some people like to build new houses. So whatever it is, there's lots of ways of succeeding in property, but always pick a part of the property industry that you enjoy doing. And remember, more than anything else, it's a business, and you're there to make money. It's not a hobby, it's a business. Whether you've got one property or 10,000, it's a business. Very important.
Okay. Joanne, have you got something to add on this?
Well, our clientele is quite different, I would say, because obviously they do come over and do renovations, but it's not generally for investment because the property prices don't increase as much as they do in the UK, so it's quite stable. And therefore you're not, most people underestimate the cost of renovation.
Of course. They do in England as well, don't worry.
Particularly in a foreign country, and you don't always get it back.
No.
If you're doing it for your own home, then you don't care how much you spend because
exactly,
it's for yourself. But for investment, we don't seem to see that many Brits coming over to do that for investment purposes. It's normally just to live or rent out as a holiday home.
Well, I can remember about 25 years ago, I bought a house in Switzerland, and I sold it, and I went back some years later thinking the price would be astronomical now, and it was still the same.
And that was Switzerland.
Yeah, and there's just no inflation.
Mind you, I've done a few deals in England like that over the years as well. Unfortunately, haven't we all? But I wasn't intending to.
Yeah. Okay, John. Again, we've talked about this on the programme before, but I think one of the key things is you're not going to understand everything about the industry, whichever part of it you go into. And I think it's pretty key to get people around you that know what they're doing, a really good team.
Yeah.
That's
I always say, surround yourself with the best people you can. And if they're brighter and better than you, and I've got some people surrounding me which have over the years been brighter and better than me, then that's great. The difference between them and me is, I'm the risk taker. I listen to what they say and I make the decision. I'm the captain of the ship. But actually, they're brighter than I am. And I think, it's horses for courses in a way, but you do need to surround yourself with the best people possible you can afford. And the difference between investing your money in one consultant and another that's perhaps a lot better is very little. So always spend the most you can afford on the advice, in my view, because you'll get, the better the people around you, the better deals you'll do.
Yeah, well, I mean that's a very professional viewpoint and a very good one. I'm thinking from Joanna's point of view, her type of clientele will be people who are probably making a single investment in France, maybe a little cottage industry,
and may I say, with their heart,
yes,
not their head. And that's the other thing in the UK. If you're looking to make a business out of it, it has to be the head, not the heart.
But I also think, from Joanna's point of view, that kind of person, she needs exactly what your business does, which
Absolutely.
is this sort of all-encompassing service, which talks you through the schools, the areas.
Well, and definitely tradesmen, because you know, a lot of the Brits make the mistake of bringing builders over from the UK, but then they're not insured.
No.
They're not covered. They can't just turn up if something goes wrong, or you get leaks and everything else. And you know, there's the language barrier. So there are British registered builders in France and French that have teams of French as well. So loads of companies.
And do they speak French, these builders?
Yeah, they do.
Because I've got some builders that hardly speak English.
Really?
So you know, I'm impressed.
Yeah, no,
really
they do.
impressed.
I mean, there's some really good companies, but you'll generally find, even if it's a British-owned company, they will have French tradesmen. Like they might have a French electrician, or they might have a stonemason that's French, because the building materials are different to the UK as well. So there's lots of. It's always best to stay local and get the best recommendations for renovations.
Okay, guys, thank you. Very good advice, I'm sure. So that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. Join me again after the break.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time, and joining me are Joanna Leggett and John Howard. Welcome back. So, Joanna, your second question. Are the necessary permits for acquiring residency in France any different in the bigger cities as opposed to the more rural areas? I understand that in some areas it can be very difficult and quite costly.
Well, no, not at all. It doesn't vary. It doesn't start that again. It doesn't matter where you actually live, whether you're in a city or in the rural countryside. You would need to go along to your local prefecture, which is like the town hall, and then you'd need to fill in the necessary documents to apply for residency. At the moment, there's no cost for that. But what you would probably need to do first is speak to the British Embassy before you leave to go to France, because if you are planning on staying there, you'd need to get a long-term visa initially before your residency. So that would be where the process would generally start.
And how long is that long-term visa?
Well, that depends what you apply for. I mean, you're allowed to be in the country for 3 months, as we talked about. So you can stay for 3 months any time over that. So if you're looking for properties and you want to stay there all year looking at properties, you would have to apply before you come to France at the local embassy to get the visa. Then once you've got the visa, obviously that will have a date on it, whether it's 6 months or it's a year. But while you're then in France with your visa, you can then apply for the residency. But to enable to get residency, obviously you're going to need an address. I presume you'll be renting until you find the property, or you've bought a property and you're intending on moving into it. And then you would need to actually be able to prove income, as we talked about before, that you would need it to show that at least 15,000 a year's worth of income to be able to get the residency. That's just basically so you're not dependent on the state.
Let's just go back a step. So you go to French Embassy in London and you apply for this visa, which will allow you to perhaps spend a little longer than 3 months looking for your properties. That's fine. So let's say you've asked for a 12-month visa. Would you get that?
Yes, yeah, I mean, people are getting them.
And would you have to show the same criteria, i.e. £15,000 income for that period?
For the period that you're in France? Yeah, if you're applying, I mean, you're going to have to prove funds anyway, whatever type of visa it is, because what they don't want is you to arrive in France and then you're totally dependent on the state, with us not being in the union anymore. So you would need to prove income to even get the visa. Okay,
so let's then look at the process. So we get our 12-month visa, we spend 6 or 7 months finding a property and then probably a couple of months trying to buy it. So assuming we do buy it, can you just walk us through that process a little bit?
Yeah, it's quite different to the UK, the buying process. So basically you'd go and view the property, you'd put in an offer. If the vendor accepts that offer, then the compromis de vente, which is like the exchange of contracts, is drawn up straight away. So it's not done 6 weeks or 10 weeks later. So that would be drawn up and then the vendor would sign that first. By the vendor signing that means he can't then sell it to anyone else and he can't withdraw. He can withdraw from the sale altogether, but he can't sell it to anyone else. So it does sort of stop the gazumping process. If he did sell it to someone else, when that sale goes through, 10% of the property value would go to the buyer that had signed a compromis de vente. So he would lose 10%.
You could run a business on
that.
That's great. I like that idea, Joe. Let's get cracking. Come on. That's great.
So, so generally speaking, they wouldn't get gazumped unless the person offered 20% more,
So it's
because then the 10% would be worth
so it's
giving.
really,
to still
it's really
make
like a
another
lockout
10.
agreement, really.
Yeah,
almost.
it totally is. So it's quite safe. So then
Clever idea.
the buyer, however, has a 10-day cooling off period. The vendor doesn't. So the vendor can't pull out, but the buyer can. So after 10 days, if they are still wanting to go ahead with the process, then they would send their deposit, 10% deposit, to the notaire, which would hold that deposit until the sale completes. Then after the 10 days, if there's any suspensive clauses, like they want planning for a swimming pool, or they want to change a barn in change of use into a property, as long as, or a mortgage, for example, as long as all the clauses are met, then the sale will complete. If one of the clauses isn't met, for example, they refuse finance, and that had been a suspensive clause, then the buyer can withdraw from the sale with no penalty. However, if they get to the end and all the suspensive clauses have been met and they just decide not to buy it, they will be liable. They will lose their 10% deposit.
Okay.
That's
So-
a really good way.
So let's say then, for example, we've been there the 6 or 7 months looking at properties. We found the one. We've gone into the process.
Are we going together, by the way, to do this?
No.
Or are you going on your own?
No, I've got no money, I'm afraid. So I'm struggling here. Never mind about in France as well. So that buying process, what's it going to take? 2 or 3 months?
It usually takes 3 months, yeah.
Okay.
In France, there's a thing called the SAFER, which means anything over 2,500 square metres of land, which most real properties are, has to be offered to the farmers first. It's an association, and that can take 2 months to come back. You can pay to have it speeded up. Generally speaking, they never preempt the sale, unless it was like a 100-acre farm. Then they are likely to possibly
I think you
preempt
could
the
make
sale.
a business out of that as well, couldn't you, John? I quite like
I
this.
think we're on our way, aren't we? On our
Well,
way, aren't we,
yeah,
Stephen?
yeah.
So generally speaking, I'd say three to 4 months, the
Okay.
process.
So that then takes us up to the 12-month period of our visa, which has allowed us to do this process. So we're on month 12. We've bought the property. What about residency now?
Well, you wouldn't have left it for 12 months to apply for the residency. You'd apply for it as soon as you got there. So, yeah, you'd go to the prefecture because you want to be staying. You've got your visa, which enables you to stay there anyway. But if you're going for residency, then you need to apply as soon as you get there. So that obviously that situation isn't
So
going
it's
to happen.
seamless, yeah.
Yeah.
So how long would the residency application take, for instance?
It really depends on the area. For example, I'm in the Dordogne and mine took 4 weeks. The Charente have taken 6 months. So it really, because it was the backlog, we've had COVID, we've had people off work, we haven't had people in offices. It's speeding up now. It's a lot quicker now, but over the last 2 years, it has been quite difficult.
You see, what I'm just taking you back to there is the question that we're asked here. I understand that in some areas it can be difficult and costly. I wonder if that is a result of timing rather than an increased physical cost, if you understand.
Yeah,
me.
it just is because there wasn't people in offices. So they backlogged and now they've got to get through all of these files of people applying for residency.
Okay, and that's catching up, you think?
Yeah, I think so, yeah, definitely.
Great, thank you, Joanna, for
Interesting,
that.
isn't it,
Yeah,
Stephen?
quite complex, actually.
Yeah, we might have to have a little trip, I think, see Joe.
Right, well, if you're paying,
Always welcome.
Thank you.
If you're paying,
Well, I normally am.
right. I don't know whether my Oyster card will take me that far, but there we are. Okay, John, this is a question about HMOs, but I think it's also about, in essence, property owners' obligations to some degree. So I have a lease agreement on an HMO property in which I've now lost my tenants due to structural and service issues within the building. I've been unable to get any response from the owner of the house, either about the repairs that they need to undertake or indeed the position of my tenancy. The owner lives abroad and just seems to ignore everything. Can you help?
So let's just set the scene a little bit. So this is someone who's rented it off the freeholder.
I'm guessing they've done a rent to rent.
Rent to rent is
Yeah.
what I'm trying to get. Okay. So that's very interesting. A lot of people do these rent to rents and they're quite successful with it. And I think if you're starting out in your property journey, then potentially a rent to rent isn't a bad way to start. But you always got to remember when you hand it back in 3-5 years' time, it's got to be in the same condition you took it in. So although you might get a good profit rent every year, you might have to put some of that back to put it back into the condition to hand it back. That's the first thing I'd say about rent to rent. This person obviously and this is quite common, because the person who is the freeholder is obviously not wishing to manage the HMO themselves, so they've done a rent to rent. And because of that, there are sometimes problems like this, because they've got no interest in the property anymore. You know, they've just gone, I'll take half the rent I should be getting, no hassle, but it's your problem, not mine. But clearly in a situation like this, it is their problem because they are the freeholder. The only thing you can really do is start legal action against the freeholder. You know, you've got a legal lease that says, you know, they adhere to this, this and that. And if they hadn't done so, then the only option you've got, if you can't get hold of them, or they won't speak to you about it or do anything about it, then it has to be the law, doesn't it?
Well, I suppose the other alternative, John, is fine. You're right. You could take out some kind of legal proceedings that would force their hand to do it, and you could also add to that the damages that you've suffered.
For
through
sure,
the
you've
loss
got to
of
prove
rental.
those damages.
But I just also wonder whether it couldn't be the other way too. I would be very nervous about continuing any sort of relationship with a landlord of that type.
I'd be handing it back.
And I just wonder whether you just walk away and let them instigate any legal proceedings, and then hit them with a counterclaim if it goes, you know, if it comes on board.
I think probably so. I mean, you know, these agreements, they're all very well, you know, as everyone says, I always say about agreements, it sits in the drawer. If you've ever got to get that agreement out, you're in trouble, whether it's a shareholders agreement or any other sort of agreement. You know, while it sits in the drawer, you know there's no problem. But as soon as you have to get that out, you know, it's all right saying, oh, we're covered with everything. But ultimately, it's a problem.
So, John, on balance, would you instigate proceedings or would you walk away?
I would walk away. But I would give them notice I'm walking away.
Yeah.
To help the case if it did go
any
to court.
mitigation if it happened later. Yeah.
I'd say, well, we've given you 3 months to sort this out. If you don't do it within the 3 months, we're going to walk.
I know, Joanna, you don't really deal with rentals at all, do you? So you've
No.
probably not come across this.
Well, we have this ridiculous law in France, which has just been scrapped for the first time in years. That it's the other way round though, where the landlord isn't allowed to put anyone out between October and April in the winter months. So you were never allowed to give people their notice or put them on the streets type thing. But they've just scrapped that law for the first time in January this year. So, but yeah, as we say, we don't generally deal with rentals, but they're very similar to what they would be here.
It's a very difficult situation. I think, as John says, the moment you have to get an agreement out and start looking at the small print and relying on it, you're in trouble. I mean, if it's with a tenant, for instance, the moment you take out legal proceedings, you're going to get no rent until it's settled, are you?
And to be honest with you, if you want to get them out, I've even swallowed my pride, Joe, and paid them some money to go. Although they owe me money, I paid them a month's rent to go, rather than, because if you end up in court,
it's going to cost you more.
It's going to cost you more. So, you know, at the end of the day, I want that property back as soon as possible to start earning some rent out of it. I don't want to be in a six months court case, and then the judge says, well, they can remain, but they're going to pay you an extra £10 a week. You know, I mean, come on. It's just not going to happen, is it?
Seeing is believing, I think.
Exactly, I agree with you. Yeah.
All right, guys. Listen, thank you both very much indeed for partaking your knowledge with us.
It's a pleasure.
It's really good to have you here, both of you. Interesting to see the foreign sort of angle on everything.
Yeah, it's interesting. Very interesting.
It's different. It's not that different, is it really? No. But there we are. Okay, well, thank you both very much indeed. So, Joanna Leggett, John Howard, great to see you. Look forward to seeing you next time. I'm Stephen Galpin. I look forward to seeing you next time on Property Question Time.